London, spring of 1815. The whispers began long before Lillian Harrington even stepped into the ballroom. They followed her like a shadow, soft, poisonous murmurs carried through fans and gloved hands, exchanged between ladies who had mastered the art of polite cruelty. In London society, reputation was everything. And the Harrington name had been ruined for nearly a decade. Lillian had learned long ago how to endure it. The grand ballroom of Petton House glittered under hundreds of candle flames reflected in crystal chandeliers. Violins filled the air with elegant music while silk gowns rustled like quiet waves across the marble floor. Nobles laughed softly, alliances were formed in whispers, and fortunes were measured in dance cards. And among them all stood the one woman no one wished to acknowledge. Lillian Harrington remained near the far wall, exactly where society preferred her. Invisible. Her pale blue gown had been carefully mended earlier that afternoon, the fabric pressed with such care one might almost mistake it for new. But Lillian knew better. It was 3 seasons old. In London society, that alone was enough to make her an object of quiet ridicule. Still, she held her head high. Across the room, her younger sister Emily moved through the crowd like sunlight. At only 18, Emily possessed everything society admired: beauty, innocence, and a hopeful heart not yet hardened by cruel gossip. Lillian watched her closely. Not with envy. With protection. Emily laughed at something a young gentleman said, her golden curls catching the candlelight as she smiled. For a moment, Lillian allowed herself to breathe easier. At least Emily had a chance. A chance Lillian had lost the day their father's name had appeared in every scandal sheet in London. 10 years ago, their father had been accused of financial deception involving several noble families. Whether the accusations had been entirely true no longer mattered. Society had made its judgment swiftly and without mercy. The Harrington name had been buried under disgrace. Their father had died only months later, leaving behind debts, whispers, and 2 daughters forced to survive the quiet cruelty of polite society. Lillian had been 17. Old enough to understand that her future had ended before it had begun. Since then, every season had been the same. Invitations out of obligation. Polite smiles hiding mockery. Dance cards that remained painfully empty. She had long ago stopped expecting anything different. But tonight would be different. She just didn't know it yet. The music shifted as a new dance began. Couples moved gracefully onto the floor while servants passed trays of champagne among the guests. Lillian remained where she always stood, observing quietly, existing without intruding. That was when the room changed. At first it was subtle. A ripple of curiosity moved through the guests, followed by the unmistakable silence of collective attention. Heads turned toward the tall doors leading to the terrace. Someone new had arrived. Lillian noticed it immediately. He stood near the shadowed entrance, apart from the glittering crowd as though he belonged to another world entirely. Tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in black evening attire that fit him with effortless authority, the stranger seemed carved from stillness itself. Dark hair. Sharp features. A gaze that missed nothing. He was not speaking. He was simply watching. And that alone made people uneasy. Several gentlemen glanced toward him cautiously. Ladies pretended not to stare, though their curiosity betrayed them through fluttering fans and hushed conversations. No one approached him. No one dared. In London society, strangers were rare. Unknown noblemen even rarer. Lillian studied him briefly before looking away. He was not her concern. Men like him, powerful, mysterious, clearly important, did not notice women like Lillian Harrington. She had learned that lesson too many times. Unfortunately for her, someone else had noticed. And that someone was Lady Catherine Fairfax. The Countess of Petton was known throughout London for her impeccable taste, her dazzling parties, and her cruel sense of amusement. Lady Catherine adored social games. Especially when Lillian Harrington was the unfortunate subject. Lillian felt it before she heard it. That familiar pause in conversation. The slow gathering of attention. Then came the voice she had learned to dread. "My dear Miss Harrington." The words drifted across the ballroom with deceptive sweetness. Lillian closed her eyes briefly before turning. Lady Catherine stood near the center of the room, her jeweled gown sparkling under candlelight as though she herself had been crowned queen of the evening. Around her gathered a small circle of amused guests, those who never missed an opportunity for entertainment. And tonight's entertainment was obvious. Lillian. "My dear Miss Harrington," Lady Catherine repeated with a smile far too sharp to be kind. How unfortunate that you appear, without a partner this evening. A few quiet chuckles spread through the circle. Lillian kept her expression calm. Humiliation was easier when one refused to react. I am quite comfortable, my lady, she replied softly. Lady Catherine tilted her head. Oh, but that will not do. Her fan snapped closed with theatrical precision. We have a most distinguished guest who appears equally unoccupied. Every eye in the room turned toward the terrace doors. Toward the stranger. Lillian felt 30 pairs of curious gazes fall upon her instantly. The meaning was clear. Lady Catherine had found her entertainment. The forgotten spinster, and the mysterious outsider. Perfect. Surely, the Countess continued smoothly, you would not deny our guest the pleasure of conversation. A few ladies giggled behind their fans. The stranger had not moved. But he was watching now. Watching Lillian. She felt the weight of his attention even from across the room. For a brief moment, her heart pounded with something dangerously close to panic. But Lillian Harrington had survived 10 years of humiliation. One more would not break her. She straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and walked forward. Each step across the ballroom felt heavier than the last. Conversations faded as she passed, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone wanted to see how this would unfold. The disgraced spinster, and the mysterious man no one dared approach. Lillian reached the terrace doors. Up close, the stranger seemed even more imposing. He was taller than most men in the room, his posture perfectly still, his dark eyes studying her with unsettling focus. Not mocking, not amused, simply observing. For the first time in years, Lillian felt something unfamiliar. Nervousness. She stopped a polite distance away. Good evening, sir. Her voice remained steady despite the dozens of watching eyes behind her. I hope you will forgive the interruption. The man did not answer immediately. Instead, his gaze moved slowly across her face, as though studying something unexpected. Then finally he spoke. His voice was deep, calm, and surprisingly gentle. I believe, he said, the interruption was not yours. Lillian blinked slightly. That was not the response she had expected. Most men forced into such a situation would have reacted with visible discomfort, or polite dismissal. But this man did neither. Instead, he gestured toward the empty chair beside him. Please. It was not a command. But it carried the quiet authority of one. Lillian hesitated only briefly before sitting. From across the ballroom, Lady Catherine watched with clear amusement. The humiliation was expected to begin any moment. Only, it didn't. The stranger remained calm, unbothered, almost as if he had expected her. For several seconds neither of them spoke. The music continued. The ballroom resumed its low hum of conversation, though many guests still watched discreetly. Finally Lillian spoke again. I am Lillian Harrington. There was no point hiding the name. The reaction came immediately. A flicker of recognition crossed his eyes. He knew it. Of course he did. Everyone did. But instead of discomfort, he smiled. Not a mocking smile. A real one. Adrian Blackwood, he replied. The name meant nothing to her. But something about the way he said it made her pause. Blackwood. She searched her memory. No noble family in London carried that name. Are you visiting London, Mr. Blackwood? She asked politely. A faint spark of amusement touched his expression. Something like that. Lillian studied him quietly. There was something unusual about this man. His posture. His calm. The way he seemed completely untouched by the invisible rules of the ballroom. Most guests were performing, every gesture carefully measured by social expectation. He was not performing. He simply existed. And that alone made him dangerous. May I ask you a question, Miss Harrington? She nodded cautiously. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, still studying her. Why did you come tonight? The question caught her completely off guard. Of all things he could have asked, that. Lillian hesitated. Because the honest answer was far too complicated. She could have said obligation. She could have said family. But something about his gaze made lies feel pointless. So she answered truthfully. For my sister. Adrian's brow lifted slightly. Lillian glanced toward the dance floor where Emily laughed again with her partner. She deserves a chance at happiness, Lillian continued quietly. And sometimes that requires enduring unpleasant evenings. Adrian followed her gaze. Understanding flickered in his eyes. When he looked back at her, his expression had changed. There was something new there. Respect. You are braver than most people in this room, he said simply. Lillian almost laughed. If the rest of the ballroom could hear that sentence, they would think it a joke. But Adrian Blackwood was not smiling. He meant it. For the first time in many years, Lillian Harrington felt something unexpected. Oh. She did not yet know that the man sitting beside her was not simply Adrian Blackwood, and that by the end of the night, all of London would know his true name. For several minutes after their conversation began, Lillian almost forgot where she was. Which, in a ballroom filled with London's most judgmental nobles, was nothing short of extraordinary. Adrian Blackwood spoke with a quiet calm that made the chaos of the room fade into the background. He was not overly charming, nor did he attempt the exaggerated politeness so many gentlemen used when speaking to ladies. Instead he listened. And that alone made him different from most men Lillian had encountered in society. Across the ballroom, however, the situation looked very different. Lady Catherine Fairfax watched from the center of the room with growing irritation. This was not how the evening was supposed to unfold. She had expected awkward silence, embarrassment, perhaps even the poor man attempting to escape the conversation as quickly as possible once he realized who Lillian Harrington truly was. Instead, the mysterious stranger remained seated beside her as though he had chosen the company himself. Lady Catherine's smile tightened. "Well," she murmured to the group gathered around her, "how unexpected." A few ladies whispered behind their fans. "Does he not know who she is?" "He must not. Poor man." Lady Catherine snapped her fan open slowly. "Oh, I believe he will learn soon enough." And she had every intention of making sure he did. Back on the terrace, Lillian found herself doing something she had not done at a social gathering in years. She was speaking freely. Adrian asked simple questions about her life, her interests, even her favorite books. There was no mockery in his tone, no hidden curiosity about scandal. He spoke to her like she was normal, respected. The unfamiliar feeling made her slightly uneasy. "You ask many questions, Mr. Blackwood," she said gently. Adrian leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile touching his lips. "I prefer to understand people before judging them." Lillian studied him carefully. "Most people in London do the opposite. That is what I have noticed." For a moment they both looked toward the ballroom. The guests moved gracefully across the dance floor, but the atmosphere had changed. Many people were watching them, pretending not to. Lillian sighed softly. "I'm afraid your reputation will suffer if you remain here too long." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "My reputation?" "Yes," she replied calmly. "Anyone seen speaking with Lillian Harrington quickly becomes a subject of gossip." Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. "And does that trouble you?" She hesitated before answering. "Not anymore." He studied her quietly. 10 years is a long time to carry other people's judgment. Lillian looked at him in surprise. "You know about my family?" Was not a question. Adrian did not pretend otherwise. London society rarely forgets a scandal. "No," she said quietly. "It does not." For a brief moment, silence settled between them. Then Adrian spoke again. "And yet," he said thoughtfully, "I see no reason to believe the rumors." Lillian blinked in surprise. "You have known me less than 10 minutes. "Yes." "And yet you trust me more than the rest of London does." Adrian's expression was calm. "I trust what I observe." That answer lingered in the air between them. Before Lillian could respond, however, a new voice interrupted. "Oh my!" The sound of Lady Catherine's voice was unmistakable. Lillian's shoulders stiffened instantly. The Countess approached them slowly, her elegant gown sweeping across the terrace floor as several curious guests followed behind her. This was no longer a private moment. This was a performance. "My dear Miss Harrington," Lady Catherine said sweetly, "I see you have found our mysterious guest." Lillian stood politely. "Lady Catherine." The Countess turned her attention to Adrian with exaggerated curiosity. "And you must be Mr. Blackwood," he replied calmly. Lady Catherine tilted her head. "How delightful." She studied him carefully. "You are not from London, I assume?" "No." "How fascinating," she continued. "And yet you appear quite comfortable speaking with Miss Harrington." Adrian did not react. Should I not be? A few guests nearby exchanged amused glances. Lady Catherine's smile widened slightly. Well, perhaps you are simply unaware. She leaned slightly closer. Miss Harrington's family has a rather unfortunate history. Liliane felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising again. This was the moment Lady Catherine had been waiting for. The public reminder. The quiet destruction of reputation. Adrian, however, remained perfectly calm. I am aware, he said. Lady Catherine blinked. Oh. Yes. And you still choose to sit with her? His gaze met hers directly. Yes. The firmness of his answer caught everyone off guard. The Countess recovered quickly, though her smile had lost some of its warmth. Well, she said lightly, that is certainly generous of you. Liliane could feel dozens of eyes watching them now. Whispers had already begun spreading through the ballroom. But Adrian was not finished. Lady Catherine, he said calmly. Yes. May I ask you a question? The Countess appeared amused. Of course. Why does Miss Harrington's presence trouble you so much? The question landed like a stone in still water. Several nearby guests fell silent. Lady Catherine laughed lightly. My dear sir, it does not trouble me at all. Then why, Adrian continued, have you spent the last 10 minutes attempting to embarrass her? The air turned painfully still. No one spoke. Lady Catherine's expression froze for a brief moment before her polite smile returned. You misunderstand. Adrian's voice remained calm. I rarely do. Now the tension was undeniable. Guests began gathering closer, drawn by the unfolding confrontation. Lady Catherine's tone cooled slightly. I assure you, Mr. Blackwood, I meant no offense. Then perhaps, Adrian replied, you will explain your earlier remarks to the room. Liliane's heart began to race. This was not how these situations usually ended. Normally she would quietly endure the humiliation while others watched. But Adrian had changed the rules. And Lady Catherine clearly did not like it. The Countess straightened proudly. I merely wish to inform our guest about the history of the Harrington family. And you believe that history defines Miss Harrington? Society certainly seems to think so. Adrian looked around the room slowly. Then he stood. His height alone commanded attention, and within seconds the music inside the ballroom had stopped completely. Every guest was watching now. Even Liliane felt a sudden wave of uncertainty. What was he doing? Adrian's voice carried easily through the silent ballroom. It appears, he said calmly, that London society enjoys forming opinions with very little information. Lady Catherine folded her arms. And what information do you possess that we do not? Adrian turned toward her. Then very quietly he answered, My name is not simply Adrian Blackwood. A murmur rippled through the room. The Countess frowned. Oh. Adrian reached inside his coat and removed a folded document. A royal seal was visible on the wax. Even from several steps away, Lady Catherine recognized it instantly. Her expression changed. That, she said slowly, is an official decree. Yes. Adrian handed it to the butler standing nearby. Perhaps you would read the first line. The elderly servant adjusted his glasses nervously before opening the document. The room was so quiet that the sound of paper unfolding echoed across the marble floor. Then he read aloud. By decree of His Majesty King George III. Several gasps echoed through the crowd. The butler continued. The title and lands of the late Duke of Blackwood are hereby granted to his heir. He looked up slowly. His Grace, Adrian Alexander Blackwood. The ballroom exploded with shocked whispers. A duke. Not just any nobleman. One of the highest-ranking men in England. Lady Catherine's face had gone completely pale. Liliane stared at Adrian in disbelief. You're a duke? Adrian met her gaze calmly. Yes. The revelation spread through the ballroom like wildfire. Moments ago, Adrian had been an unknown outsider. Now he was one of the most powerful men in the country. And he had just publicly defended the most disgraced woman in the room. Lady Catherine struggled to regain her composure. Your Grace, she said carefully, had we known? That, Adrian interrupted gently, is precisely the problem. Silence fell again. You treated Miss Harrington poorly when you believed she had no power. His gaze swept across the gathered nobles. Now that you know I possess it, your behavior changes. No one dared argue. Adrian turned toward Lillian. His voice softened. Miss Harrington. She looked at him, still stunned. Yes, Your Grace. He offered his arm. May I have this dance? The request sent another wave of shocked whispers through the ballroom. Lillian hesitated only a second before accepting. As they walked toward the dance floor together, the entire room watched. The disgraced daughter of a scandal, and the most powerful duke in London, dancing together. And in that moment, London society realized something terrifying. The woman they had spent 10 years humiliating had just gained the most powerful ally imaginable. The ballroom remained silent long after the music had begun again. No one could pretend this was an ordinary dance. At the center of the polished floor, under the glittering chandeliers of Petton House, Lillian Harrington was dancing with one of the most powerful men in England, the Duke of Blackwood. Just minutes ago, she had been standing alone against the wall, ignored by nearly everyone in the room. Now every pair of eyes followed her. Whispers rushed through the crowd like a rising storm. Did you hear what the butler read? He's truly the Duke of Blackwood. And he chose her to dance. That Harrington girl? Yes, her. For London society, the situation was almost impossible to comprehend. The disgraced daughter of a ruined man, now moving gracefully across the dance floor with a duke whose name alone commanded respect across the kingdom. Lillian could feel the stares. They were impossible to ignore. Her hand rested lightly in Adrian's, while his other hand supported her gently at her waist. The orchestra played a slow waltz, but the world around them felt strangely distant. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Lillian took a breath. You should not have done that. Adrian looked down at her calmly. Done what? Announced yourself in such a dramatic way. A faint smile touched his lips. I did not intend for it to be dramatic. Lillian gave him a look that clearly said otherwise. You revealed you are a duke in front of half the aristocracy of London. Yes. That qualifies as dramatic. Adrian chuckled softly. Perhaps for the first time that evening, Lillian noticed something else about him. He seemed completely unbothered by the chaos surrounding them. Most men would have been enjoying the attention. Adrian looked almost bored by it. You are worried about my reputation again? He said. Yes. You should not be. Lillian shook her head. You do not understand London society. His eyes softened slightly. I understand it very well. She studied him carefully. Then you know what they will say tomorrow. Probably many things. That the Duke of Blackwood has poor judgment. That he associates with disgraced families. That he has been manipulated by a woman desperate to restore her reputation. The list came easily. Lillian had heard variations of those accusations her entire life. Adrian listened quietly. When she finished, he asked only one question. And will any of those things be true? Lillian hesitated. No. Then they do not concern me. His answer was so simple that she almost laughed. If only society worked that way. But deep down, something inside her warmed slightly. No one had defended her like this before. Not publicly. Not without hesitation. As the dance continued, their movements carried them across the ballroom floor. The guests parted instinctively, leaving space around them. Some watched with fascination. Others with obvious disapproval. And near the edge of the room stood Lady Catherine Fairfax. Her elegant smile had vanished completely. She had spent years controlling the subtle power structures of London society. Every gathering, every whisper, every alliance had flowed through her carefully arranged circles. And now, in a single evening, a stranger had disrupted everything. A duke no less. And worse still. He had chosen Lillian Harrington. Lady Catherine's fan snapped shut sharply. This is absurd, she murmured. Several ladies near her nodded cautiously. No one even knew he was in London. How long has he been here? And why her of all people? Lady Catherine's eyes followed the dancing couple with cold calculation. This is not finished. The music ended. Polite applause echoed through the ballroom as the dancers separated. Adrian released Lillian's hand slowly, though his gaze never left her. You dance very well, he said. I used to practice often. Used to. There was a time when I believed dancing would matter. Adrian studied her for a moment. And now? Now it is simply a pleasant memory. Before he could respond, another voice interrupted. Lillian. Emily hurried toward them, her face glowing with excitement. I cannot believe what just happened. She stopped abruptly when she noticed Adrian standing beside her sister. For a moment, the younger girl looked slightly terrified. Your Grace, she said quickly, attempting an awkward curtsy. Adrian inclined his head politely. You must be Miss Emily Harrington. Her eyes widened. You know my name? Your sister mentioned you earlier. Emily glanced between them curiously. Oh. Then she leaned closer to Lillian and whispered far too loudly. He seems nice. Lillian tried very hard not to laugh. Adrian, however, heard it clearly. His expression remained perfectly serious. I try to be. Emily blushed furiously. Across the ballroom, the tension had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown stronger. Several powerful families were now watching the scene with intense interest. The arrival of a new duke always created ripples in society. But this duke had just challenged the unwritten rules of London's elite. That could not be ignored. And someone finally decided to act. Lord Whitmore stepped forward from the crowd. Tall, proud, and known for his strict devotion to social tradition, he represented the very core of aristocratic authority. Your Grace, he said with a polite bow. Adrian turned toward him. Lord Whitmore. The older nobleman folded his hands calmly. May I speak with you privately? You may speak here. Whitmore hesitated briefly before continuing. There are concerns regarding your public defense of Miss Harrington. Lillian felt her stomach tighten. Of course. It had begun. Adrian's voice remained calm. What concerns? Whitmore glanced around the room. The Harrington family has been associated with serious financial misconduct. That accusation was never proven. It was widely accepted. Adrian tilted his head slightly. Widely accepted does not mean true. Whitmore frowned. Surely your Grace understands the importance of protecting the reputation of our society. And you believe Miss Harrington threatens it? Whitmore hesitated. Her father's actions damaged many families. Adrian looked at Lillian briefly. Then he turned back to the nobleman. You may find this interesting. He reached into his coat once more. But this time, instead of a royal decree, he removed a small leather folder. Inside were several carefully folded documents. These arrived from the Crown Archives 3 days ago. Whitmore accepted the papers cautiously. The moment he began reading, his expression changed. Confusion. Then shock. What is it? Someone asked from the crowd. Whitmore looked up slowly. These documents? His voice faltered. They prove that Lord Harrington did not steal the funds he was accused of taking. The ballroom erupted into stunned murmurs. Lillian felt the world tilt slightly beneath her feet. What? She whispered. Whitmore continued reading. The missing money was transferred through a secondary account, controlled by another noble family. Adrian spoke quietly. The Harrington estate was used as a scapegoat. Silence spread across the room. Every noble present understood the gravity of such a revelation. If true, it meant London society had destroyed an innocent man and punished his daughters for 10 years. Lillian's voice trembled slightly. You knew this. I suspected it. And you investigated? Yes. Why? Adrian looked at her with quiet honesty. Because I do not like injustice. Across the ballroom, Lady Catherine's face had gone pale. Her husband's family had been among those most vocal in condemning the Harrington scandal years ago. If the truth spread, her reputation would crumble. The balance of power within London society had just shifted. Completely. Lord Whitmore cleared his throat. These documents must be reviewed by the council immediately. They will be, Adrian said. And until then. Whitmore looked toward Lillian. I believe Miss Harrington deserves an apology. Several nobles lowered their eyes. Others remained silent. But the damage had already been done. For 10 long years, Lillian Harrington had endured whispers, rejection, and humiliation. And now the truth had finally surfaced. Emily grabbed her sister's hand tightly. Lily, this changes everything. Lillian could barely speak. Across the room, the crowd slowly began to disperse. Some guests approached to offer hesitant greetings. Others quietly slipped away, unwilling to face the consequences of their past cruelty. Within an hour, the once crowded ballroom had grown noticeably thinner. Only a few guests remained. Lady Catherine was no longer among them. She had left without a word. Adrian stepped beside Lillian again. You look overwhelmed. That is because I am. He smiled faintly. That seems reasonable. She looked at him carefully. You changed my life tonight. Adrian shook his head. No. I only revealed the truth. Lillian glanced around the now quiet ballroom. Truth has a way of changing lives. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian asked quietly, May I walk you home? Lillian hesitated. Not because she feared gossip anymore, but because something far more dangerous had appeared. Hope. And hope required courage. Finally she smiled. Yes, Your Grace. Adrian offered his arm once again. As they walked toward the exit together, the last whispers of London society followed behind them. But this time the whispers were different. Because the forgotten daughter of a disgraced family was forgotten no longer. And the Duke of Blackwood had made sure of it.